Hi everyone. Today we're delving deep into a topic that I have not yet covered. I want to say that I appreciate all the love and support, especially to the authors that gave me permission to narrate said stories or experiences. And I hope you enjoy listening to these stories as much as I did reading them. I want to tell this story, just so I can know if anyone knows what I saw or has seen similar beings. When I was 6 years old, I saw 2 humanoid lights being in my room. I used to share a room with my sisters, and I had the top bunk in a fairly small room in San Francisco at the time. One night, I woke up and saw a faint light coming from the room. So I looked over and saw the beings. One was tall and large, and it came off as being a man. The other one was a smaller, almost childlike size, and it came off as being a girl. The beings themselves were light, but they weren't too bright that you couldn't look at them. They had no facial features or any hair. They looked like if you cut out a silhouette of a person from a white piece of paper. From what I remember, they looked two-dimensional as well. The man was standing in the doorway and the girl was standing in front of the mirror above the dresser we had in the room. They had no eyes, but I could tell they were staring at me. I wiped my eyes because I thought they were just my tired eyes showing blurry images. But I kept wiping and they didn't disappear. They were too bright and distinct to be my eyes anyway. At first, I thought I had seen ghosts for years, but the more I read, the less likely I think that they were that. At the location of Sparrows Point, Edgemere, Maryland, around June of 2020, late at night near a tree by my grandfather's driveway. I was waiting in my grandfather's truck because my brother and I were going to Wawa. He had forgotten something in the house, and so he went back inside to get it. As soon as he left, I noticed a very tall and bony humanoid with pure black eyes standing under a tree right in front of the truck. This creature looked at me with a blank expression, but somehow looked very angry. The creature was tall, and I could see his bones popping nearly through his rib cage as if it was a severely anorexic human. His clothes were like a jock from a movie or TV show set in the period of like the 80s. The creature looked like a kid I knew, and both him and the creature were about 6'4" and very scrawny. The creature's stare made me very afraid and made me feel as if I had my fight or flight response triggered. My brother then walked out the door and I looked at him and looked back where the creature was, and it had disappeared. Soon after, for about a month, I started to hear voices, multiple all at once, just randomly, and getting progressively worse. The voices would only whisper my name, but it was constant. The voices sounded like my mom, my best friend, me, and an unknown, very somber voice. I believe whatever this creature was targeted me based off of my grief of having my heart broken for the first time, and I was really depressed, drinking anywhere from 3 to 5 energy drinks a day. The voices then disappeared after one night. Sometimes I feel like I hear the voices coming back, but never to the extent that it was. One of my biggest fears is to see that creature again, but sometimes my curiosity makes me want to know what it was, what its intentions were, and what would it have said to me if my brother never came out. This happened sometime in July of 2013. I woke up around 3 a.m. and I just couldn't fall back asleep. I started looking around my room. I was contemplating getting on my computer, but was too lazy to actually get up. So I just laid there until something caught my attention in the hallway. My door was slightly open, so I could just see a little bit. Before I tell you what I saw, let me give you a quick picture of what my house looked like back then. When you exited my room, there was this long hallway. In the middle of it, to the left, was the entrance to the kitchen, and right in front of it, to the right, was the door to the bathroom. At the end of the hallway, back then, was a front door with a little window on top, so the moonlight kind of seeped in. It must have been a full moon or close to it because I could see that the hallway was decently lit. Anyway, what caught my attention was this small head peeking at me from behind the slightly open door. It was really close to the ground. At first, I didn't really think much of it, and after a short while, I thought to myself that it must be my dog. My dog is a Maltese. He's small, and back then, he used to sleep above my head on my pillow. So I reached my hand up to see if he was there, and sure enough, he was sleeping there. That's when I got kind of confused. We didn't have any other animals in the house, and I lived with my mom and my grandpa. Both of them were asleep, and they sure wouldn't peek at me in the middle of the night on what seemed like all fours. So I quickly looked back at the door, and I saw this thing hide behind the door. I don't know how long I laid there in shock, but eventually, I decided to get up and investigate. I quickly got up, and I ran to the light switch, turned the light on and fully opened the door, and when I did, I saw this thing's legs. It was entering the kitchen. It was on all fours and it didn't run. It seemed like it didn't even care about me, as it was moving kind of slow, like it was taking a casual walk. Its skin was grayish, and it looked like it was dirty. It had these black spots on it, maybe dirt, I don't know. Its legs were skinny and lanky. Once again, I was paralyzed. I didn't even know if I was scared at that moment. I think I was just shocked at what I was seeing. When it disappeared in the kitchen, I ran to the bathroom and locked myself there. I didn't come out for a long time, and when I did, nothing was there. Nobody woke up, not even my dog. I have no idea what it was. All I know is that I for sure wasn't dreaming. I'll never forget the feeling in my stomach when I saw this thing. When I was 11, I was at my sister's house. It was the middle of the night and I was sleeping. I'm a light sleeper though, and I felt this pressure on the end of the bed like someone had just sat down. I opened my eyes and see, there is an alien sitting on the end of my bed staring at me. I felt frozen and cold, and I shut my eyes straight away. Then I half opened my eyes, squinting through my eyelashes, and see he's still there, just staring at me. I notice he has huge black eyes and a huge pale head. I couldn't make out nostrils, but there was a very small line to indicate a mouth. But that's hazy too. In my memory, he has a black jumpsuit which enclosed his feet. The bodysuit stopped at his wrists and neck. He sits there for a bit, just observing me. I would have no idea for how long. I know he knew I was awake. I don't know how or why. But I just know. I didn't feel threatened. I just knew he wasn't going to do anything. Then, after some time, he gets up quickly and exits through the doorway, and I realize he is huge. Taller than the door frame, so maybe 7 feet tall. I stay frozen, count to 30, and then race to the lounge where my sisters were sleeping and slept with them. This encounter is the most clear and true in my mind. I do have 2 others, but because I was playing video games at the time, I give favor to one's childish imagination and tend to discount them. But this particular encounter changed the course of my life forever. I often wonder why he wanted me to know he was there. Clearly, they don't have to be seen if they don't want to be. If anyone has any good reason or knowledge, please let me know. This event happened to me when I was a volunteer firefighter at the age of 17. This occurred in an area of South Carolina known as Mount Pisgah, which is also the name of the fire department I was with. It was a winter month, January or February, and I was coming home from a call or a meeting from the fire department. Below the department was a school, and on the same road was a bridge. It was probably around 11:30 p.m. or so, and Mount Pisgah is nothing but country, and it was pitch black dark. As I approached the bridge and my headlights leveled out with it, I noticed 3 people in cloaks right in the center of the road in the center of the bridge. Being in the middle of nowhere, I did not stop. The crazy thing is, when the front of my truck got about 4 feet from the beings, they disappeared. Once I passed through the spot where they were, I looked in my rear view mirror and observed 3 sets of red eyes looking at me as I got further away. This scared the hell out of me, to say the least. I got to school the next day and asked my best friend if I could tell him something, and he, not to think I was crazy, he said sure. As I began to tell him what happened, all the color in his face drained and he was white. I asked him what was wrong and he just said, "Man, you're crazy. I saw the same things around a week ago in the exact same spot and didn't say anything to anyone because I didn't want to look stupid. This is one of the craziest things I've ever had happen to me." It started in the summer, when me, my dad, and my nephew traveled to Tres Marias Reservoir. It was nice. It had a pool, a soccer field on the back of the inn, and a nice view of the reservoir bank. The inn is faced straight to the reservoir, with the parking lot in front and right in between the building of the water. A couple 100 meters away, there is a small pier where you can catch some big fish, and by the sides there's a dense forest and a dirt road leading to the city. We slept in different rooms, and one night after dinner, I laid and listened to some music on my phone, falling asleep moments later. At around 2 a.m., I woke up, got to the bathroom, and innocently looked through the window to see the moon shining on the water. First, I looked straight to the moon and then I looked down towards the water when I saw a humanoid figure, like a shadow between the water and the moonlight, reflecting on the water. I'm sure that it was not human. It was no more than like 4 feet, walking with a curved posture, long arms that go past knees, and pretty slim. Didn't see the skin color because I've only saw the silhouette, and it was walking very slowly, with light steps. My spine got cold as ice that moment and gave me goosebumps. I've never seen something like that before. I moved away from the window and stayed in silence. Got out of the bathroom and locked my room's door. I opened a small gap from the main window to watch the figure, but this time I saw nothing. I left the window open with a small gap. I laid back in bed again, backwards to the window, with the moonlight on the wall in front of me. Then I heard some buzzing noises. Scared the soul out of me. My heart started shaking when I see a shadow block the moonlight, like someone was peeking on my window. My jaw was trembling in fear and I was paralyzed with the scary noises. All of a sudden, as the sound started, it goes away in the distance. My body tingles, and I finally could catch some breath after this encounter. After all this, my head hurt so much. Maybe because of the sounds or the distress. I was in shock for some hours after the incident and cried like a baby. We left the inn on the same evening. 1 year later in 2012, I saw on the news that a 3-cylinder shaped UFO was seen in the exact same spot on the Tres Marias Dam, couple miles from there. Couple miles from where I was staying. A couple miles from where I saw the silhouette of that very same being. I want to start off by saying that I am open to any ideas of what this could have been. I am now 26 years old, and this happened between the ages of 4 and maybe 8. This is something I tried to not talk about when it was happening, and have not talked about it up until recently. When I do think about it, I usually just tell myself that it was sleep paralysis. But I am not entirely sure if I believe that. Here's my 100% true story. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, and I lived in the Chicagoland area my whole life up until this past year. The neighborhood I grew up in was about 20 minutes south of the city. Our house was not in a rural area, but we lived right next to the train tracks and a huge golf course. I was never a scared or skittish kid up until these instances started to occur. The first time it happened was when I was 4 years old and sleeping in my bedroom. I don't remember falling asleep, but I know my dad would have put me to sleep in my bed. That was our routine. I vividly remember what happened in the middle of that night. I woke up to a being hovering over me, looking me right in my eyes and communicating with me through the gaze. I was completely paralyzed. This being was not human, but had human features. It had large eyes and gray skin. It did not look like the typical alien, but it was otherworldly. I was terrified, and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I felt this immense amount of pressure in my chest, and I could not make a sound. I remember the being leading me out of the front door. I think I was either carried out or floated out. I'm not entirely sure. The next thing I remember is waking up scared shitless, and I yelled out for my dad, and he came to my bed and asked me what was wrong, and I told him, I can't tell you, or they'll come back to get me. He let me sleep with him and my mom that night, and he brushed it off as a dream. Okay, sure, no big deal, until it happened multiple times after that. This dream kept happening for years until I was about 8 years old, and it would always happen around fall. Sometimes the dream would happen only once a year. Other times, it felt like it happened multiple times in a year, but always around the exact same time of year. I believe that it was the same being and situation every time, but I do feel like there was some variance and somehow I was taken out of the house. Each time, I would tell my dad that I wouldn't tell him what was going on. My dad confided in me, years later when I was in my early 20s, that it was just some of the scariest moments of being a dad. He said I was absolutely terrified, and he worried it was a demon of some sort visiting me. I remember once, he had my aunts light candles all around the bedroom and say a prayer before I went to bed, and I think that must have been their way of protecting me from whatever was visiting me. My dad also mentioned a time when we were playing catch in the house, and I ran to get the ball from my brother's room and came out and told my dad, "We can't play anymore." When he told me that, it jogged my memory of running into my brother's room, looking out of the window that faced the backyard, and feeling that intense, paralyzing stare from the alien. As I've gotten older, I've been interested in aliens, but I am not quick to believe everything I read or hear. I am just here to share my story of what happened to me as a kid. This event still shakes me and my dad up, and when we ever think about it, even over 20 years later. Also, I apologize because I am not the best at telling stories. So, please, let me know if something is unclear, or feel free to ask any questions you may have. Alright, so this is the last story I have that I feel is relevant. It's also the very first encounter I ever had, and for me personally, the scariest. I've kind of been working backwards in terms of the timeline with the stuff I've posted here. This 3-day event took place in 2007, just at the end of a break, as I believe I remember having a few days off of school. So, back in high school, my best friend, Mike, would always stay every other weekend at my grandparents' house. They own a ranch in rural North Carolina, and there was always a bunch of stuff to do. We would usually help my grandpa do whatever needed to be done during the day, and at night we would just stay up watching movies or playing video games. So, one night, around 3 a.m., we were still up playing some Xbox when we started to hear my dogs outside barking. So, normally that's not an issue. There are a ton of deer around, so it's pretty typical. But shortly after they started barking, they started to yelp, thinking it could be a bobcat or coyotes or something. We immediately jumped up and ran outside. It took us a while to actually find them. Eventually, I spotted them hiding under our front porch. They were completely backed against the wall, frantic and absolutely terrified. As soon as I looked up, I saw what was scaring them so damn much. Maybe 50 yards away, there was this person just standing there. They were right on the edge of the outside light, so I could just make out what I was seeing. It looked like a tall person wearing an all-white morph suit. There was no real identifying markers I could make out. Just a pitch white, extremely slender, tall, featureless person. I could barely make out a pair of eyes, but for the most part, the face was totally smooth. So, it was just staring at us. I'm now standing up, kinda stunned, just looking at it and not wanting to take my eyes off of it. Mike was walking around the corner now and immediately sees it too. We were both just stunned and had no idea what to do. After maybe 30 seconds of just staring at it, it starts to back its way into the tree line, never turning away from us. Once it vanished into the woods, I was filled with adrenaline. I wanted to go grab a light and find out what the hell we saw. Literally the second I turned to say as much to Mike, I could see he was literally already halfway inside the house. Chasing the strange tall thing into the dark woods was an astounding no for him. So instead, we woke up my grandpa, told him we saw someone outside while leaving the stranger details out. He snagged his gun and flashlight and did some light searching around, but couldn't find anything. So ends night number 1. On night number 2, we were both starting to settle in for the night. I was in my upstairs bedroom. Mike was across the hall in the guest room. I remember us both watching the same thing on the TVs in our rooms when there was a very loud thud outside his window. Naturally, this is concerning, but on top of that, the roof of the house is pretty elevated and sits maybe 15 feet above the ground. Both of our rooms had multiple windows that lead to the roof, and you could walk right out onto it. So, as soon as I heard the thud, I poked my head out into the hallway and looked at Mike to see what was going on. We both muted our TVs, and I went into his room where we just stood there listening. We could hear very loud footsteps, walking around his room basically from window to window. Once it reached the last window, there was a pause, followed by probably the scariest noise I've ever heard in my life. It's hard to totally describe, but the closest thing I can think of is like if you were to scream, but instead of pushing out air, you're sucking it in. It was surreal. We were both totally shook. As soon as the noise was done, I could hear another 2 or 3 thuds near the end of the roof, and that was it. Needless to say, we didn't sleep that night. Both of us were just too terrified and basically sat up listening for any other strange noises. The next day, Mike left. He told me he was never coming back and never did. We had been hanging out for 3 years now, and those 2 days were more than enough for him to say never again. The third day was the worst for me. I was up in my room playing some more Xbox when I saw that it was around 3 a.m. I figured I'd turn off and attempt to get some sleep. As soon as I turned off the TV, I could hear the dogs outside barking and just kind of froze, thinking, great. This is when I took a pretty wild turn for me. I heard the downstairs door at the base of my stairs open up. I immediately tiptoed over to my bedroom door and closed, then locked it. I just kind of sat there wondering what the hell to do. My grandparents were on the other side of the house, and I was too nervous to yell anything out. Looking back on it, I'm pretty ashamed by how cowardly I was in this scenario. After a short period of hearing some moving around, I could make out someone now walking up my stairs. I'm now having a full-blown panic attack. I can hear them pressing against my door now, and every once in a while, there are sliding noises as if their hands and ears against the door and they are just trying to find a better spot to listen. My carpet is pretty high, but I can just make out a shadow under the door of someone standing on the other side. At this point, I had totally panicked and called Mike and his mom. I didn't really know what to do. This was in a very rural countryside, and the closest police station was more than 20 miles away. On top of that, my grandparents' property is completely surrounded by forestry and cornfields. The road leading to their property is a dirt road, and if you don't know where it is, it wouldn't matter if I gave you an address. You'd miss it in 9 out of 10 times. So, I'm basically sitting on the other side of my bed now, just waiting for the door to get kicked in or something. This lasted for a good 5 minutes and it felt like a lifetime. Eventually, I could hear what sounded like the person pulling away from the door. They walked back downstairs, and I could hear them walking around the living room for a bit. The downstairs floors are all older hardwood, so I can more or less pinpoint exactly where people are walking if I'm listening hard enough. And if they are walking with heavy enough steps. Moments after that, I heard the downstairs door slam shut. I still wasn't buying it, but for a minute or two later, and there was this pretty explosive boom. I even had a picture frame fall off of the wall. At that point, I got a little gutsy and managed to open my door and see that everything was clear. As I walked downstairs, I heard my grandpa get up to go to the bathroom. I'm positive that this wasn't them, as I'm very familiar with the different sounds of the house, but I still asked. I asked if they were walking around or if they heard some loud noise, and he more or less said no. It's 3 a.m. Why the hell are you still up? So that was that. I talked with Mike about that in ad nauseum, and to this day, I have to call him occasionally just to ask, did that really just happen? I'm not imagining this, am I? But it gets more interesting. When we went back to school from the break, I had told the story to one of our other friends. He got pretty wide-eyed and asked where my grandparents lived. When I explained it to him, he was pretty thrown back. Turns out, his uncle had a place a few miles down from the road from them. Over the break, his uncle, his cousins, and a few of their family friends had what they believe was an incident involving extraterrestrials. His uncle's story is way more detailed than mine, but in parts he described tall, pale beings, similar to what we saw. There was some assumptions of abduction due to the missing time. A few after effects including his uncle's long-term health issues, mysteriously disappearing after this event. My friend would go stay one night at their place every so often and claim to see lights and other weird phenomenon. I don't want to muddy the details of their claims, but I believe this stuff still continues fairly regularly, with some of this stuff almost resembling something you would associate with hauntings opposed to alien abductions. Shadow people walking around the house through walls, things being moved around without anyone touching them, stuff like that. I've since become friends with my buddy's cousin, so I've spoken with him a couple times regarding the experiences his family had gone through. So, in conclusion, this was the first event I've ever experienced that made me very interested in these kinds of topics. It definitely changed me. Probably not for the better. I'm without a doubt the first guy that dies in the horror movies now. Sound in the basement. I guess I better go see what that was. I'm always going to be angry with myself for not just sucking it up and opening the door on the third night. I understand the argument of, what if it was something dangerous happened as a result? I get that, truly. But honestly, just for the sake of knowing without any shred of doubt what that was could have made it worth it. I also want to cap this off by stating that the 3 stories I've posted on this page are 100% true. I'm not here to embellish anything or make up any fiction that I think is cool. I'm just not interested in pawning off made-up stories as the stuff of truth. I think that muddies the waters of what I believe is a very interesting topic that I love to fall into. This encounter took place about 4 years ago. Since learning about humanoids and, in particular, about the rake, I was always very fascinated about them. Back in the good old days, one of my best friends, Robert, would come over for sleepovers. I introduced him to the rake. We always watched horror movies or videos of bizarre encounters as we loved to frighten ourselves before venturing out into the local woods. Till that night trip, we never encountered anything really creepy when venturing into the woods. Sometimes, Robert would try to stand still in silence in hope of hearing something exciting. In order for you to better understand my thoughts later on, I want to give you a detailed explanation of our path. It was after midnight when we headed out. Shortly after entering the forest, there is a small crossing with a left path and a right one. We took the right path, walking up a hill for about a quarter of an hour. After that, we just pretty much followed the path, reaching the peak of the hill, and then ventured down again for about another 10 minutes. We reached another crossing. The left path would lead us to another exit, whereas the straight path would lead us to continue walking onto another hill. About an hour and a half going up the hill, I told Robert that I wanted to go home as I started to get cold and exhausted. Furthermore, I told him that I did not see us witnessing anything exciting anymore for that night. Robert was disappointed, but nevertheless agreed. Robert wanted us to regularly stop speaking and be completely silent so we could hear everything surrounding us. We also flashed our lights in the woods regularly. This is where it starts to get creepy. As we started to head down the second hill, we started to relax and talk about other interests. As my shrimp posture obliged to me, I more or less only looked at my feet when walking. As we reached the second crosswalk again, Robert suddenly scurried up in a panic. He asked me whether I also saw something jump or hush in the woods coming from the right path to the path we originally came from. As I already mentioned, I looked at my feet when walking down this path, meaning I could not have seen anything. However, I believed that Robert just wanted to build up suspension, as he liked to do that when nothing happened on our trips. So I did not really believe him in that, and started throwing rocks in the area where said figure seemed to head. We stood still for some minutes, listening for suspicious sounds, but the forest was in total silence. Realizing this, it made me somewhat uncomfortable. On our way back from the second crossing to the first, we started to ease back down again and started talking normally. The walk back also took about half an hour. This is where it gets really creepy. As we were about to reach the first crossing, I used my flashlight on the trees that were not too far in front of us. As I pointed my light on them, I noticed that there were two yellow dots right beside a big tree. As we came closer, I could see it more clearly. These were not just two yellow dots. I started to realize a bald head with these two yellow glowing eyes. I told Robert to stand still. I pointed him the area where the thing was peeking from the tree. I was furious at him because he did not see it. I told him that he needed to focus on the yellow dots. When he recognized them, he freaked out too. I freaked out even more when I thought about our situation. This creature stood between the only near entrance and exit out of the forest and us. We really started to panic, as we did not know what to do. As Robert also started to flash on that creature, and we both more or less shouted at ourselves. The creature went behind the tree and peeked out from the other side. As we followed with our lights, it stepped back from the tree. I was able to see more of its body. It was a white gray, hunched over, and its arms were hanging down. It slowly walked away from the crossing, moving one leg then the other. We stood on the spot for a few seconds. Then I carefully started to peek in the area. It vanished. I couldn't see it anymore. I told Robert to run for his fucking life. And boy oh boy, even Usain Bolt would have been astonished at our speed in that run. We ran through the exit and went back to my home. It was the scariest experience of my life. What I really find so intriguing about this encounter, this creature followed or stalked us very quietly through the woods for about half an hour since Robert spotted it on the second crossing toward the exit. Or it was just smart enough to recognize where the path we took would be leading us to, as we first saw it at the second crossing, and then in front of us at the exit. It was also able to recognize pretty fast that we spotted it. I think by switching sides at the tree when peeking, it wanted to confirm for itself whether we spotted it by seeing us rotating lights to the other side of the tree. Last but not least, I don't think it was scared of us in the slightest, even as I remember Robert starting to speak more loudly in a stressed voice. It just calmly started to walk away. When I was in my early teen years, me and my family moved into a cabin owned by my father's boss. For a whole year, he worked at a logging mill in northern Minnesota, about 100 miles from Canada. The cabin was a few miles away from the mill. Other than a gasoline generator located in a small shack outside, we had no electricity, nor running water or any modern amenities. I was no stranger to the forest or nocturnal forest adventures at this point, so living here wasn't so bad from the outside looking in. But the first sense of this place you get is a strong sense of being watched and the absolute dead silence. These two factors alone would remain a 24/7 norm at this place, in the sense that this atmosphere never really changed unless it was storming, to the point where while me and my siblings were at school and my dad was at work, my mom would hide away during broad daylight because of the sense, and describing hearing what sounded like someone jumping and crawling on the sheet metal roof occasionally. To the main course of this story, most of my experience there came at night, where more often than not, I would always be the last one asleep. When this would happen, there would be a shadowy figure at the windows outside this living room, or outside my bedroom window. I remember so many nights where I would be paralyzed with fear, true fear, feeling this figure's gaze on me with an almost telepathic sense that the figure was communicating with me with the language of emotions. There were many opportunities for me to be taken alone, but I can't remember a ton of what would happen on my 1.5-mile walk from where the bus would drop me off. For the longest time, my father, he was a seasoned hunter and former linebacker in high school, never believed me as a kid until one night he asked me to dump the sink bucket outside. I refused because it was dark and that those things were out there. He scoffed it off, having a few drinks in him, led me out the front door while I held the bucket and got 2 feet out before something heavy booked it through the forest, like a bulldozer from right outside the door, sending my father back inside and pushing me. Another instance we had was with my younger brother while exploring a game trail. We were approaching a cutout in the forest for power lines when something screamed at us, and my dad got us out of there. A scream that mimicked a woman screaming bloody murder, but with the ferocity of power of an elephant. It went right through you, like the strongest dose of infrasound possible. Another strange event to my father. Oh, and every morning my mom would start the generator so we could get ready for school. And before she would, something would smack the generator shack and take off into the forest, scaring the hell out of my mom. Thank you everyone for listening. If your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support. I hope you enjoyed today's stories as much as I did reading them.